Iconography, the analysis and use of imagery across various media contexts to create meaning. It is present in almost all facets of contemporary life, including video games, a sector which has had iconographic influence from their dawn. From Pong's basic score user interface to the expansive menus of MMORPGs, iconography is an aspect of gaming which binds it together. For example, one genre of video game where iconography serves a vital purpose are JRPGs, with conventions dating as far back as the 1980s remaining consistent even now. However, these conventions would be forever changed when one JRPG took these norms and defined a new way to utilize iconography. That game was Persona 5. Developed by Atlus, Persona 5 was released in 2016 for the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4, having an upgraded remaster released in 2019, known as Persona 5 Royal. Over the next 9 minutes 59 seconds, I will seek to understand how accessibility and meaning are derived from Persona 5's iconography, the efficacy of this across the various parts of the game, and discuss areas for improvement. Atlus produced Persona 5 as an installment of the Persona series, a branch of the Megami Tensei franchise. For the uninitiated, Persona 5's plot is set in Tokyo and centers around a group who have the ability to summon a persona, a manifestation of one's true self. Using this ability, they change the hearts of those who corrupt society by accessing their palaces, the manifestation of their dark desires. Across the narrative, systems are supplemented with consistent aesthetic iconography to distinctly stylize the game and support mechanics. As game systems have developed since the first Persona game, iconography has too. Nowadays, players are overloaded with more info than ever before. Persona 5 not only streamlined such systems, but adopted an identity far more unique than any other JRPG on the market. You've likely taken note of this already. There are a few instances where UI elements don't primarily utilize red, black, or white. Instead of using subcolors, Atlus used central lines and different color patterns to easily convey important information on screen, whether it be through menus, traversing the game world, or across battles. Battles are a pivotal aspect of any JRPG, and Atlus pulled no punches when creating Persona 5's iconic battle iconography. Not only does it correspond with established aesthetic, it also streamlines battles. With 4 playable characters present in a party at once, the player needs to know exactly which character is active. How do they do this? Simple. The currently controlled character will have the UI literally wrapped around them, and their icon will distinctly change, distinguishing them from other party members. These icons are also used elsewhere, making it abundantly clear which player character is currently active. This clarity of selection continues with a graphically moving red reciprocal atop enemies. You may recall that I mentioned there are a few instances where UI elements don't primarily utilize red, black, or white. One of these few instances is the turquoise heart icon in close proximity to the red reciprocal, indicating enemy health. The more damage dealt, the less turquoise within the heart. Once drained, it shatters and the enemy perishes. Hearts not only are an established indicator of health across media, but here it could symbolically be linked to Persona 5's theme of changing the hearts of the wicked. Furthermore, the use of the green spectrum is often linked with health, which is also consistent with the colour of the player's health. By associating this colour with health across the game, it helps players recognise health-based iconography comparatively to other aspects of the screen. Another successful use of iconography is the UI surrounding the player, which corresponds with the buttons on a DualShock 4, right down to the colour. Upon pressing one of these buttons, a pop-up will appear. By assigning various battle commands to various buttons, Atlus removes the need for scrolling through menus, streamlining battles. Speaking of efficiency, Persona 5 uses recognizable shapes and colors to establish its affinity-based elemental system. Opening up the Persona menu, the player can see various stats of the active persona. However, alone, this screen is hard to comprehend. I mean, what the hell does Gigantomachia mean? Well, you may have noticed the orange icon next to this ability is also present here. This section allows players to determine the various affinities the persona has with the various elements through letter-based icons. For example, we know Nekomata here can nullify whatever this yellow icon refers to. Naturally, this is lightning. Not only is yellow a colour often associated with electricity, but lightning's association with bolt shapes is prominent across media. Now, that one and these two are obvious, but the rest? Not so much. Let's play Guess the Element. Can you please tell me which of these is associated with wind attacks? Well, if you guessed the green one, you'd be right, but I'd understand if you mistook this blue propeller looking icon for it instead, which actually corresponds with nuclear attacks. Differentiating wind abilities may be tricky at first due to poor use of shape and colour here. This trend continues with the remaining icons. You may be able to surmise that these two refer to light and dark, but honestly, what the hell is this pink thing? You'd be forgiven for not knowing, but it belongs to psyche attacks? I guess it kind of looks like Aquaman's telepathy, but I honestly doubt that's what Atlas were going for. Lastly, we've got these two orange symbols, referring to standard and gun attacks. Though their proximity away from elemental attacks distinguishes them well, the symbols themselves aren't so helpful. This is supposed to resemble bullet holes, and this a bashing motion, I think? Either way, they just look like various explosions if you ask me. Though these icons may be hard to identify at first, the use of color association is done well here, as elements can be linked to the color and identified quickly. This is actually a step up from previous games in the series which, though using the same symbols, lacked color. Previous games also had no indicator visible next to the abilities, whereas Persona 5 does, allowing recognition of the symbols and color rather than recalling ability names. A bonus of using symbols in battle is accessibility. For example, imagine if the game just colored words in corresponding elemental colors. Anyone with color blindness would struggle to effectively utilize the battle system. Now, moving away from battle iconography, Persona 5 shop iconography functions similarly to other JRPGs. Indicators of price, character affinity, and player allowance are all here. However, what differentiates them from other JRPGs is, once again, the aesthetic and identity, with distinct lines conveying what can be selected and colours corresponding to each shop's purpose, such as blue, medical tones for the doctor's shop. These stylized features leak into all the game's menus, for example, the Confidant menu. Confidants refer to characters the player can interact with in a dating sim-esque fashion. The menu shows characters' appearance and friendship rank, distinguished by a portrait and coloured stars respectively. If the player dates a character, these stars become hearts, a shape associated with love. Interestingly, the character portraits can change with narrative progression. The best example of this is Goro Akechi, initially assumed to be a pleasant young man, before being revealed to have a sinister past. Upon these revelations, his portrait corresponds. His false facade of a twinkling, white-eyed boy is replaced with a sullen expression, his eyes completely black, as if reflecting the presence of his dark, exposed true self. The consistency of aesthetic iconography continues in the explorative section, with distinct pop-ups and manga-esque emanata luring the player towards areas of interaction, ensuring they aren't wandering aimlessly. These features further leak into palaces via the icon for the security level. The higher the security level, the more enemy encounters. This icon will fill, the bar will become redder, and the map will have a spiky red outline. In color theory, red is often associated with danger, and any player of the Sonic franchise will know spikes are a big no-no. This indicates to the player that they need to be more cautious. Now, I've gone on about Persona 5's style for some time now, and don't get me wrong, I love it, it's great, but with so much going on at once, it can become overwhelming for players and hard to comprehend what's important. Let's compare it to another game, Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII's UI and iconography is simple but effective. Everything necessary is on screen when it is required. You've got the bar at the bottom, abilities appear at the top, and a damage indicator appears on the enemy following an attack. In comparison, Persona 5's UI is all over the screen. You can't escape it. The UI is embedded into the action of the game. It will literally follow the player character around. Whereas in Final Fantasy VII, it sits comfortably at the bottom, so you know where everything is at all times. So why did Atlus not just go for simple iconography? I mean, every Persona game prior had pretty standard UI. Well, I contend that the reasons fall under advertising and the establishment of a distinct brand identity. Even if you haven't heard of Persona 5, it's likely you've seen the branding somewhere, whether that be on advertisements, in other media, or even memes. And hey, even if you hadn't before today, you have now, and I bet you won't be forgetting how stylistic this game is either. Overall, Atlus have successfully combined both aesthetics and navigation through the use of iconography to make Persona 5 easily accessible for players. Though there are areas for improvement, Persona 5's quality of life changes and distinct aesthetic style from prior Persona games will undoubtedly pave the way Atlus and the wider gaming industry create JRPGs and utilize iconography in the future.